Hello, Furidashi listeners. Nicholas here. Lauren was off this week, so I sat down with Z and Nim from Square Weasel Studio to talk about storytelling and game aesthetics. This is the first half of our conversation that you'll get for free. And next week, when the second half comes out, if you want to listen to the rest, you're going to have to head on over to patreon.com/Furidashi to sign up at the Secret Squad level to hear the second half of our conversation. But until then, here we go. That's always a great way to start a recording. Okay, I'll do a little intro bit real quick so that we have something. Hey, everybody. Lauren is off this week. She's on vacation. She's being extremely lazy. No, she's taking a well-deserved break. But I have with me this time around our two favoritist game designers. Well, okay, maybe I should... Well, but no, actually, you are returning champions, Z and M from Square Weasel Studio, here to collect their cash prize of $0. How are you two doing today?
You're good.
Just back from vacation.
Yeah.
Well, so this is going to be kind of a free-form discussion because, it's technically Monday was a holiday here in the US, and so that's one of the reasons why Lauren is gone.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a really stupid holiday. So it's Memorial Day, so it's the day in which we honor all of the people who fought for imperialism. So that's a fun day. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. Politics session is done.
It's funny, we had in Croatia also this Monday some holiday, also
statehood day.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah. We were just we wanted to go eat somewhere and nothing was working.
Is it like adulthood for a country where like you are a state now? Congratulations. Make a wish and blow out the candles.
Yeah. It's coming of age day, but for nations.
State, yeah. We can drink. The country can drink or something like that, or go to war. I don't know.
Well, yeah, no. Well, in the U.S. we have the weird issue of you can be old enough to go die for your country, but you're still not old enough to drink. So that's always fun because the age of majority here is 18, but the drinking age is 21. So
yeah, I was so confused when I heard that.
I think it makes sense on the level that if you want to make a decision like that, you better not be drunk when you make it.
I suppose it's true, but there's still a lot, especially when it comes to like army recruiting in the US, there's still a lot of coercion involved. So like when I was in high school, way back when, in the dark ages, they would actually allow army recruiters to like come into the lunchroom on a daily basis and just like chat and essentially like no one else was allowed to do this. Like my school was otherwise like locked down, but for whatever reason, like Army, Navy, and Marine recruiters were just allowed to like wander the lunchroom going like, hey, have you thought about a career in the military? And it was kind of odd.
I remember learning that if you join the military, you get a whole bunch of benefits. Like they pay for your free college education and things like that. I was like, okay, that's something. So then they made the video games to recruit people, like the U.S. Army FPS. I don't know if you know about that.
Yeah. During the whole the Army had this like Army of One recruiting thing, and part of that was it's not just like the games that the Army made, but also if you look at AAA studios often have like either I guess you could say contractors who are either former military or current military who advise them on like the reason why like all that shit in games like Call of Duty looks so realistic is because they literally have people from the military advising them on those things.
Yeah, they have the budget for that.
Well, it's not just the budget, it's that the Pentagon like active like it's a it's a mutual thing because the game studio is both getting the benefit of the knowledge of these like military contractors, but at the same time, also the military is basically getting free propaganda.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's the same with movies as well. So that's fun. But so wait, how did we? I don't even remember how we got on this topic of recruit. Yeah, Memorial Day.
Holiday. Holy day. It's a holy day.
Yes, the most holy of days, Memorial Day. Okay, so to get on to what I wanted to actually talk about today, and the reason why specifically I thought this was a good thing for bringing you two on is aesthetics. So on the podcast, Lauren and I have been talking a lot lately, probably too much about mechanics. It's an interesting subject, but it can get really abstract. And, I was thinking back to when I first played The Remainder. So for those of you who are not familiar with Square Weasel Studio, Z and Nim have made an absolutely fantastic game called The Chronicles of Teldoon, The Remainder. It used to just be called The Remainder. So that's what I say, I apologize.
Yeah, we still refer to it as a remainder, like in normal talks. So.
Teldoon is just for Google.
Yeah.
It's just for the metadata.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is currently available on, I believe, both itch and Steam. You can play the first chapter on Steam for free, and you should because it is an amazing game. So go out and buy it now, and then come back and listen to the rest of this episode.
We'll wait. Go ahead.
Just pause, or let it play in the background as No, actually, don't let it play in the background because the music is a really important part of the game. So when I first played the game, what first attracted me to the game was actually its visual aesthetics. Over time, what I grew to appreciate was the sort of the narrative mechanics the two of you had developed. But that, took a while to get into, and that was after, like the whole beta testing phase and stuff like that. So the very first thing that I encountered was the visual style of the game, which is, okay, again, I'm just going to heap praise, is amazing. So I wanted to ask, I remember, Nim, you said last time we talked to you that like you were often really dissatisfied with the way things turned out and you kind of want to go back and like redraw everything. Is that sort of an...
Well, yeah, it's just I made so much progress since I started drawing for this game because I wasn't actually drawing human characters before. So when I started, it was really clunky. And then over this, almost 2 years of drawing for this, I now know how to draw much better. So I feel like I can make it better if I wanted to. Although now I'm in some kind of lazy mode, so I don't feel like reworking it again. But I could if I wanted to.
If we didn't need to pay rent or anything, we might be doing
maybe for some like super deluxe edition. Yeah.
Actually, or a DLC. Well, no, a DLC probably wouldn't work for that. Okay, no spoilers, but a DLC probably wouldn't work for this game. Maybe
we sketched out very loosely a kind of extension, like maybe another chapter where it started as a joke. Can I talk about the heroes thing?
Yeah, sure.
We started as a joke that Fat Pants would like get fed up with those two. And they would go to town and rat them out to the police. And there was like a whole social upheaval about the evils of Magi and stuff. So then they would send a party of like hired mercenaries, adventurers to come and investigate this tower. And then you'll have this one secret ending where some paladin will kick down the door and go like, "Stop right there, criminal scum!" And then we'll look at the door like, "Huh? Who are you?"
And then suddenly the story stops and they're trying to get out like of this like some situation, trying to explain to this paladin that
try to charm or wheedle their way out of being captured.
Yeah.
So this came out as a joke, but then later we thought like We could do that.
Yeah, because the research that Win does in the game is actually illegal.
It's highly illegal.
Yeah. So if somebody found out outside of the tower,
they'll
they
probably
could
be arrested or something.
Yeah.
And also, so there's illegal on two levels. One is experimenting with live humans. Like that's already that's the major. I think that's bad. And also the other thing is involving entities. I don't want to spoil it out, but you're not supposed to work with certain entities. That's also very, very forbidden.
Yeah.
So Win's breaking both the societal law, and the Magi's code by doing what they're doing. So
and Magic Code is there because how they have everything now set up is making them powerful and making them hold all the money and power, right? So they don't want to change things.
Yeah, you're like an outlaw priest.
Some vigilante.
Well, so then the question I wanted to ask was how important, how did the two of you conceptualize the sort of aesthetic qualities of the game? Did you see it as the draw? Did you see it as the okay, I'll just leave it open-ended. How did you think about it?
Well, at first we actually wanted to make a black and white game.
Okay.
So since I was doing the ink drawings, I thought it would be black and white. And then a little bit later, I arrived at this style that we have now. It wasn't like this at the beginning. Yeah, so I started doing some sketches and then it looked fine. But then I would always like to experiment. I make a scene and then I put it in some filters, draw on top of it, try to see what I can do. I never make one drawing that I like and say, okay, I like it, moving on. I try to see if I can make it even better. So I try to somehow build upon something good until there is no more time and I need to say, okay, it's good enough. Yeah.
One of the things I remember I was really inspired by was the idea that if you are some kind of magician, or you would be writing notes and things with your ink pen in this super old leather-bound tome.
Yeah.
Something like this one of you manuscript or something, or these rediscovered manuscripts from the Templars and stuff like that. So I thought if we can get some feeling of that in there, so you feel when you read those journal entries, you're looking at a magical manuscript.
Yeah.
And so that etched style with the ink and that black and white look will be really fitting and kind of gets you into that mood. And then later we sort of shifted over to having more color and a little bit more color, just because it pops a bit more, I guess.
Well, yeah, it has a kind of not a sepia quality to it, but definitely the color palette is pretty muted. And it's interesting that you bring up sort of the feel of old things, because it does have that. The game does have that feel. It has that kind of antique quality to it. I don't know. I imagine this is going to sound really bad, but let me explain. I imagine my grandmother's house where she has all of her knickknacks and things from the early 20th century just sort of around, and they've accumulated over time, and there's all this stuff, and there's old furniture, and there's a kind of, it's both comforting and creepy at the same time, because you're clearly in what is comfortable for someone else, but it's not necessarily comfortable for me personally. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I like. This kind of things we like.
It's kind of how our flat is. I have a bunch of knickknacks that are weird.
You have this weird aunt who is totally a witch, who collects herbs and cooks stew in a massive iron pot and things. It has just unnameable things hanging in their house.
One time there was some plumber came and he looked at my jar and he looked at are those worms? And he said, and it was actually some dried shrimps inside.
Oh, dried shrimps, yeah.
And he just looked at me with googly eyes, and are those worms? I'm no, honey, they're not worms.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So like, this relationship between like aesthetics and feel is curious to me, because I don't want to get into like the theoretical crap that I've been reading, because a lot of it's really boring, and some of it's been written by someone who's now very disgraced. I had mentioned to Z and Nim that I myself am working on a game, strangely enough, with my daughter, because I can't draw to save my life. Well, I mean, I can, but I'm not nearly as good as she is. And so she is doing a lot of the artwork for the game, and her style is very much not what I had originally like thought. Like, it's not what I saw in my head, essentially. And yet at the same time, like, through the process of like her style of drawing is a little bit more cartoonish. But because of that, like, I had originally conceptualized the game in my head as this, like, oh, it's going to be about, the politics of urban planning, and it's going to be about struggle, and people are going to have to cooperate and screw each other over, and then it's going to be like Munchkin but with Carcassonne, and all these other things that was going on in my head. And I thought it was going to be like really dark, and it's going to be like gritty. But through the process of like working with my daughter and talking to her about it, like, the game kind of turned out to be a little bit more cartoonish, or like, it's still about all those things. It's still about like, trying to screw somebody over, but much like Munchkin, it has a more lighthearted quality to it, rather than otherwise it might have. And strangely enough, it was sort of like those aesthetic qualities that pushed me in that direction. So I guess what I'm curious about is, like, did there come a point where sort of the mood that the two of you are creating with the game kind of started to, I don't know, almost like push you in certain narrative and or like, gameplay directions?
I think that the mood was there from the start. That's something that we somehow like knew how the game will feel.
Yeah.
So that we knew from the start. And also for narrative, I don't know. It's I don't know. I feel it's also, at least in our case, it's so tied together that I can't say that one thing was developing separately from the others. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mood that you create, or the mood that you feel, even if you don't necessarily have any specific designs and language to describe it yet, you know how that should feel to you, like what is the correct feeling for this world, right? For this story. And then that really helps with, for me, world building. So if I know the mood is going to be, it should feel ancient and lived in, and it's dark fantasy, so it feels, it's a kind of suppressed. Everything's kind of suppressed. There's no like this vibrance and enthusiasm. Everything is kind of going down, and it's a bit like Sisyphean, right? It's an endless struggle.
Yeah.
So that helps with the world. Like, the world is constantly on the brink of collapse, the society, and things are dying, and there's a lot of decay everywhere. There's rust, there's mold, the air is filled with particles and things like that. So then it constrains you in what kind of things should happen in a world like this.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe like, so this rules out a bunch of things. Like we wouldn't have the story wouldn't start with a party or a parade or a wild success in some experiment. It starts with a failure. It starts with forgetting, right? And trauma. So then the world building really shapes and constrains like the storytelling, what kind of plot could happen and what kind of characters might exist in such a world. So the mood kind of influences the world and then influences the plot. Something like
but
that.
I think it's also very important not to just pick one flavor and just go with that, because it will become
Yeah, we did that first. We tried to just make it as dreary as possible, and then
then we added the humor.
Then later, when we added some humor to it, just some pinpoint accents of humor, then it became much better, because it contrasted with the overall backdrop of this bad feeling. It's a bit like when you have all black and white and you put a bit of tint, then suddenly it really it comes to life.
Yeah, that was my intention with this, like how I was adding red in some parts of the game, because players will get used to having these bluish greenish tones, and then when suddenly like a bright red appears, it will be like, okay, something is happening, it will feel off, and it will kind of wake you up a little bit.
So the visual aesthetic of having just one palette, but with a strong accent that's used sparingly, is similar to the dreary tone of the world with a hint of humor here and there.
Oh,
Like resonant with each other.
So I see that, but I do have a question, because I think so. Earlier when you were talking about like what I'm going to call the fuzz pants gaiden, the fuzz pants like off story, like that whole scenario that you described, fuzz pants going off and like turning them into the authorities, and a paladin showing up and beating down the door, like that's kind of goofy. Like, I mean, so like, and the thing is that when you were describing it, what I was imagining in my head was not actually the art style of the remainder. What I was imagining was something like, say, a chibi or like super deformed version of the art style of the game. Which, like, you have these like cartoonish little characters, and maybe it's done in kind of like a Paper Mario style, where like, and the mob is coming out, and they're like,
and they're fighting. There's just a cloud of dust with like fists and
yeah, exactly. Because and I think the reason why I imagined it that way in my head is because like the tone of that kind of story, and in many ways this is confirming what you were saying, the tone of that kind of story doesn't really match the sort of like the feel of the visual style and sort of like the music and all the sound cues normally, because I think you're right that you can still have sort of a generally dreary is not really like macabre or somber tone to the game, and then have like little flashes of humor, and that doesn't necessarily disrupt sort of the overall sense of it. But if you go full whole hog into this, because Fuzz Pants, I love Fuzz Pants, by the way, as a character. I standalone game, DLC, whatever you want to do. But Fuzz Pants also is kind of out of place a little bit in the world of the game. Not God, because that makes it sound like they shouldn't be there. That's not right. It's more like there is a way to see the game as purely like a through line, dealing with like Vin story and forgetting and all those things. Like you could see the game exclusively in those terms, and then the encounter with Fuzz Pants periodically takes you outside of that, which works in the game because it's only intermittent. Well, I mean, okay, no spoilers. Point is, the game coheres, but if you go too far in that direction, the game starts to sort of lose its coherence. And I wonder if in losing the coherence, you then also lose the attachment to like a totalizing aesthetic vision. Because you were talking about the way in which sort of like the world building has this kind of like dominating effect on that. And it seems like this contradicts that somewhat.
Well, so I think in terms of, since I'm mostly a visual artist, right?
Yeah.
I just think in terms of visual composition, for example, if you do a painting that's only done with brush and ink, so it's all black and white.
Yeah.
Is 100% cohesive.
Yeah.
And you can make some beautiful aesthetics like that, right? But as in some like Chinese or Japanese water brush art, sometimes they just take a dot of red, like for the sun, or for the crown of a bird or something, and it just put one dot in there, and suddenly it's a different aesthetic. Now it's not aesthetic of unity. It's unity with a bit of contrast. But just as a one dot, you get a bit of contrast. So if you go a bit further, I'm sure you've seen some of these paintings with like birds or goldfish that's done with brush and ink. Sometimes one fish or maybe a few fishes will be with watercolor, and the rest will be black and white.
Yeah.
So it's like a gradient, right? Of how far you can go away from the base, let's say, for it still to have some kind of cohesion. So I think it's kind of like your aesthetic choice is how much cohesion do you want and how much contrast do you want. And I think in our case we're comfortable with a certain, like a good amount of contrast, because it seems more interesting to me to break molds, because you have if you have to weigh the danger of having kind of a disjointed thing that doesn't have a central style.
Yeah.
That's the danger of going too far with contracts and variety. And the other end of that scale, you have the danger of being too conservative, too cohesive.
Yeah.
That people can start to expect what will happen and what they might find in the next page. So for me, I prefer to err on the side of being a bit disjointed rather than too safe, because safe, it's boring.
In the end, when we do something, when we add, for example, some comedic part in the game, we just write it and then we see, is it too much, is it too little, and then we
stitched some stuff that we decided was too comedic. And the thing with the fuzz pans, it's like you have, I don't know if I should try to talk around the spoiler or just make a spoiler like flag here and then tell people to come back later, but we can try.
Yes. Okay. So spoiler warning, if you are planning on going, okay, you literally now have to pause. If you're going to play the game, you have to pause, you have to go play the game, and then you can come back. All right, go ahead.
All right. So just for your benefit, the way I was thinking it is that after Vin has got Erastros into a body.
Oh, you're going turbo spoilers. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going straight to the deep end.
All right.
So everything's great, right? They've saved Erastros, which was thought to be, they didn't even think it was possible. It didn't occur to them, but they managed it, and now they have some kind of like relationship that they can maybe build for the future. And then the next thing that happens is this body it doesn't quite work. Like he's not going to stay healthy. The homunculus is in bad condition.
Yeah.
Or the kind of incarnation is very flimsy. So they start to have problems. So Vin needs to go and find a way to preserve this this kind of incarnation so that Erastros doesn't like rot or something. Yeah. So they're faced with a serious problem now. They have to go out of the tower and go find some help somewhere. And for them to be out of the tower is very dangerous. Because number one, Vin is completely socially inept. And for another two, the world is in upheaval, and Magi are kind of like feared and kind of hated and feared.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous for that on that level. And also, if they run across any Magi who would most likely be able to help them with some knowledge of magic and spirits, then they would probably be able to tell that what Erastros is.
Yeah.
And that might let them try to kill them on sight.
Yeah.
So it's very bad on many levels. So with this,
Magi are not feared and hated. They're the ruling class.
But I mean, there's a revolution going on, right? With the letters and stuff.
By the way, like so for those of you who are listening, very little of this is in the game. This is like you're getting real lore here. This is the real lore hours.
Well, I mean, do you remember those letters where Vin mentions that there's uprising?
Like so there is like a silent uprising. It's not brewing. I mean, it's kind of brewing, but it's not there yet, right? So Vin is trying to find an alternative solution to how we are having, the immortality at current state. Right?
In my head, it's a little bit more advanced, but that's okay.
It's funny how after so long working on this game together, it turns out that we have completely different views on something, and then we just realize, okay, we have like different ideas about this world that we're making.
Well, no, but I think that's good. That's actually a really good jumping off point for something else that I wanted to talk about, which is that, like, when you're talking about say, like, I don't know, like a fantasy novel that has a single author, like the world building is essentially whatever is in the author's head, but the two of you actually have to kind of negotiate the world between each other, and we literally just saw that happening right here right now. And so I was wondering, like, do you feel like that is a fundamentally different experience from, say, just like writing something and like designing something completely on your own?
Oh yeah, sure.
Well, I don't know. I never wrote anything on my own. This was my first time writing something. So
I've been sketching some things, like some short stories and novel type things on the side. Nothing as advanced and finished as the remainder. But yeah, it's absolutely different because when I write for myself, I just write, right? I just
Yeah.
make stuff up. This
Well,
this
so
this
the
having
reason,
somebody
yeah,
else to critique you is great because there are things that I don't think of as having potentially being problematic
yeah,
unless somebody points it out. And I'll go like, oh, well, that's pretty obvious in hindsight. But,
Yeah, I think that our most productive times of writing this game is when we go for a walk and we talk about what is happening and how to solve something.
yeah, when we discover some differences we had, like some big ones, which can be very enlightening and then helps us to reach some conclusion about how to make the story go forward and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it's actually much more efficient when it's two of us because we almost never have a situation when we are stuck. So we are always working on something. There is never a moment when we have no idea how to proceed. Like if one person is stuck,
Rare,
then the other person starts.
yeah. Sometimes if I'm by myself and I'm trying to resolve a plot point or a world building mechanic, I'll just think about like how can I do this? I'll think scenarios and stuff like that. When I'm with Nim, I don't have to do that. If I notice there's a problem, like a plot point or something that needs a resolution, I'll just ask them like, so suppose this was to happen, what do you think happens next? And then half the time they'll have the answer for that. And the other half the time I will. So somebody always has an answer to a problem. I don't need to try to do everything myself or anything like that. So
Yeah.
and sometimes like they're stuck on something and then they'll just like say, "Oh, I don't know how to do this," and I'll just help them brainstorm it. So,
yeah, I think it's also like, for example, like if I am stuck with drawing something and I can't draw this scene, I don't have it, and then I just come and give Z to draw it a bit, and then he would draw it in a way that I don't like it, and then I would be like, no, what are you doing? Give it back. And then I would.
We have two people. Sometimes you can help with by doing. Sometimes you can help by proving a negative. So like a lot of times I prove the negative. Like I show them something and it's like that's totally not what I want.
yeah.
But now that I see that, I know what I want.
Yeah.
So it ends up helping. Yeah.
So I want to bring this back to something that you were saying earlier about sort of like the tension between like cohesion and contrast, because it seems to me like if you're existing entirely in your own head, you're almost sort of like you're experiencing all the problems with too much cohesion, because it's like your head tends to try and want to like make everything perfect, or at least make everything make sense. But if you get stuck, like what you have going on in your head is like a complete picture, and so it's like you don't really see alternatives, so you need that other person there to kind of like show you the alternatives and to sort of like then contrast with what's going on in your head. And I wonder if that feels like, is that an experience of sort of like breaking out of like a particular perspective or a particular view, or is that more sort of like stretching the view? Like does it sort of, this is a weird metaphor, I realize, but like is it more like you have like a conflict between two things and there's sort of like a dialectical resolution, or is it more sort of like a pulsar where you have like two stars that are orbiting around each other and they like give off a electromagnetic wave?
I think most of the time it's like a breakthrough, but the breakthroughs are not always pleasant. Sometimes it's I'm trying to make something work. It doesn't quite work yet, but I think if I just go like a little bit further, I'm trying to increment, to make it work. And then they also like that completely doesn't work. We need to do something else, and they'll say something else. But because I'm very stuck on the first area, I have a hesitation to jump over there because it's kind of far away. And I'm just like, yeah, but I don't want to like give up all this that I've spent all this time on. But most of the time, to give up the thing that doesn't work, it's like this. What do you call this? Like, there's a principle that when somebody has already invested in a lot in something,
sunk cost.
Yeah, that it's hard to give up a mistake. So you keep thinking stuff into that and then lose more. Whereas the smart thing would be to just give up regardless of how much you've invested and go with what is a better idea, like objectively. So
It's curious
I haven't-
that you say that, because isn't that kind of a major theme of the game? This idea of becoming like overly invested in one way of doing things and actually having to ultimately, well, I'm sort of explaining to people how to play the game now.
I mean, write what you know, right?
Yeah, that's true.